U.S. President Donald Trump is considering possible military measures among what he called very strong options over Iran's crackdown on protests. One rights group is reporting more than 500 people dead after 2 weeks of nationwide demonstrations. Iran's president says his government is determined to solve the country's economic problems while accusing the U.S. and Israel of stoking the violence. For more insights, we are now joined by Amin Saikal, adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies here in NTU. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Amin. How serious is the current protest movement compared with previous waves of unrest in Iran?
Well, it is serious because the danger really to the regime comes from two sources. One is the domestic source, and there are widespread disturbances, public disturbances in the country. And the other is, of course, from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And President Trump has promised that if the regime kills too many protesters, then it will intervene. But what form that intervention will take, of course, it's under discussion. But it is. But the president has made it very clear that the American boots are not going to be on the ground. So obviously, there's going to be an aerial operation. But at the same time, the Iranians have promised that they will respond as severely as possible, and they will target the American bases across the region. So I think the situation is very explosive, and at the same time, the Iranian authorities are doing whatever they can to contain the protests, but the protests have also really gained momentum, and the fact that it is receiving considerable amount of support from outside, that makes it somewhat very different from the previous protests which have taken place in the country.
Absolutely. And how concerned should the Iranian leadership be right now about its ability to maintain control, especially given economic pressure and international scrutiny?
Well, obviously, they are very much concerned, and President Pezeshkian has already voiced his concerns in that respect. The economic situation is very dire. It's very doubtful that the authorities or the Islamic regime has the resources to fix the economic situation overnight. I mean, what is really needed is an injection of a massive amount of fund into the Iranian economy, something in the order of, for example, $50 billion, and that could only come from outside. And which power is prepared to really put that amount of money into the Iranian economy? I think the only country that could possibly do it is China, and there is a very strong strategic relationship between China and the Islamic Republic of Iran, as there is also a similar sort of relationship between Tehran and Moscow. But of course, Moscow is not really in a position to be as much helpful to the regime as perhaps Beijing may be.
Well, basing off your answer, China might be one possible way if it can lend help to Iran. But President Trump says Iran has reached out and wants to negotiate after his threats. Now, how much does external pressure from the U.S. really affect Iran's decision in this case?
Well, obviously, it is affecting the Iranian position to a considerable extent. And Tehran has always said that it's prepared to negotiate, but not just on American terms. I mean, Washington's terms is that Iran must accept zero uranium enrichment. In other words, basically dismantle its nuclear program. But the Iranians have said that they're not going to do that, and they're not really going to go back to the zero enrichment. Even under the July 2015 a nuclear agreement between Iran and the Western powers, which also included China and Russia, Iran accepted to downgrade its uranium enrichment to 3.7%, which was mainly for civilian use. But since then, since President Trump withdrew the United States from that agreement, in 2018. Then Iran accelerated its uranium enrichment, reaching something like 60% or more, which could be a little bit below the weapon grade level. And that has been sort of alarming to the United States and some of its allies, and more importantly, Israel. And they have demanded basically the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program. But this is something that the regime cannot really easily do. And President Trump or the U.S. forces bombed 3 Iranian nuclear sites in the last war between Israel and Iran in June last year. And President Trump claimed that he had obliterated the Iranian nuclear sites. But afterwards, it became, or at least became clear to a number of experts, as well as the International Atomic Energy Agency, that no, the foundations of the Iranian nuclear program had survived. And also there was missing 400 kilogram of highly enriched uranium that the Iranians may have removed, and therefore could be really used for assembling bombs in the future.
Now, we're running out of time, but we have one last question for you, Mr. Saikal. Do you see this moment as really a temporary crisis for the regime, or really a part of a longer-term weakening of Iran's political system?
Well, it is a long term. I think the region is in a mess. Across, I mean, not just in Iran, but also in a neighbor in Syria and Lebanon, as well as the Palestinian territories, and now, of course, Yemen is another become a hot spot of competition between different forces. There is also a breakdown of good relationship between United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, particularly over the UAE's involvement in Yemen and Saudi opposition to that to a considerable extent. So I think any unraveling of the situation in Iran could not only affect the Iranians as a whole, but also could have enormous impact on the region, which is already very much on the edge and very unstable.
Thank you so much for that. Amin Saikal speaking to us, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in NTU.